We're live. It's September 21. This is the I-205, C4 I-205 Tolling Diversion Subcommittee. Commissioner Savas, you were the only chair here so far of the co-chairs, and so I'll pass to you. And we have the team here who's ready to present and walk us through the materials. Oh, here's actually Mayor Walters coming in. Commissioner, you're muted. Still muted.
Hello, sorry for being late.
Hi, Mayor, no worries. We're just getting started, so your timing is good.
Good.
So yeah, thank you all for being here. So I guess the overview and summary, it's the first item on the agenda for the I-205 mitigation. So is that going to be led by ODOT?
Yes, I think Nicole has this part of the conversation, walking us through these meetings that have gone on at the local level.
Okay.
I'll ask Adela to go ahead and share slides, and then I think Adela will get us kicked off.
Yep, well, Adela is pulling those slides up. Good afternoon, folks. Adela Mosier, I'm the Deputy Director of ODOT's Urban Mobility Office and standing in for our regular person who is here, Mandy Putney, who is currently in transit via airplane, so not able to attend today, but wanted to make sure that we had time together to talk about the outcomes of several workshops that occurred over the last several weeks related to the information that came out of the operational analysis of the traffic modeling and impacts, diversion impacts to intersections that were studied. And so we'll go ahead and I'll ask Nicole to walk us through that work, the conversations that happened with some of the, with many of the local agency staff that helped guide and inform some of the potential mitigation solutions. And then we'll make sure that there's time today for questions and additional input and feedback on these initial results. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Della. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Adela. So for those of you who haven't met me, I think I've presented at this before, but Nicole McDermott, I'm the I-205 toll project lead. So happy to be here today talking about the mitigation workshops. So as Della mentioned, today we'll provide an overview of those mitigation workshops that were held in August and early September. Next slide. We held 4 workshops with jurisdiction staff to discuss the impacted intersections and the potential mitigations. These workshops were held in person and they were split into the sub areas that reflect the locations of the impacted intersections. We also had, in addition to those 4 in-person workshops, we had a virtual meeting with Gladstone staff. They were invited to the Oregon City workshop, but were unable to attend. So we wanted to make sure we had a follow-up conversation with Gladstone staff. During the workshops, we really wanted to work collaboratively with the jurisdiction staff to identify the best mitigation solutions for the impacted intersections. So we began each workshop with a brief presentation of the impacted intersections in the sub area we were discussing. We went over the methodology used to identify the potential mitigation. We then showed mitigation concepts for each impacted intersection and had a discussion about the feasibility of the mitigation concepts and whether there were alternatives that staff wanted to be considered. So today we will share the same mitigation methodology we presented at the workshops to discuss the results and next steps. And like Della said, save plenty of time for your questions as well. Next slide. So the mitigation methodology, you can go to the next slide. Just as a reminder, the transportation analysis that identifies impacts includes a comparison of a build alternative to a no build alternative. So just to remind, we've talked about this a lot at prior meetings, but just to remind everyone of what's included in each of the alternatives. The build alternative includes the two toll points, so one at the Abernathy Bridge and one at the Tualatin River Bridges in all phases of the I-205 improvements project. So that's including the 3rd lane and the seismic upgrades to the bridges along this portion of I-205. And then the no build alternative does not include tolling and only includes phase 1A of the improvements project, which is the Abernathy Bridge reconstruction that's currently underway. So this slide provides an overview of when mitigation will be proposed. So if the intersection meets the mobility standards in the no build and build, no mitigation is required. If the intersection meets standards in the no build but does not in the build, then mitigation will be proposed. If the intersection fails standards under the no build and the build, mitigation will be proposed, and we're having conversations about a shared investment strategy. This shared investment strategy really only affects a couple of intersections, as the majority of the impacted intersections are ODOT facilities. So those along 99E, Oregon 43, and Oregon 213. Next slide. So we know there's been a lot of questions about what this shared investment strategy and proportionate share really means. So like I said, this really just applies to two intersections. But so for I-205, proportionate share means that ODOT will be responsible for the full cost of the mitigation for 18 of the 20 intersections impacted in 2027 or 2045. That's because the impact is either fully a project impact, it meets standards in the no build but does not meet them in the build, or the project may only be responsible for a portion of the impact, but it's on an ODOT facility. So therefore ODOT would still be responsible for the mitigation costs. There are no intersections in 2027 that would require then that shared investment strategy, but then there are two in 2045. So we'll discuss those specific intersections in a minute, but ODOT will continue to work with partners to identify what that right solution for those intersections are and the details of that shared investment strategy. So given these are 2045 impacts, there's still a lot of time to figure out the details of that. I do want to note that on the memo that was distributed on Monday, there was one intersection identified for a shared investment strategy in 2027. That was the Stafford and Rosemont intersection, but that was an error. So Trent has a revised version of the memo, and we'll be putting that up on the committee webpage, but just wanted to make that note. Next slide. For the intersections impacted in 2027, we're considering near-term mitigation, and that's what was discussed at the mitigation workshops. We had a lot of great conversations and feedback on these mitigation concepts. For intersections impacted in 2045, given that there's a lot that will likely change over the next 20 years, we're proposing long-term monitoring to inform the timing and specifics of those future mitigations. Next slide. I also briefly wanted to touch on our safety analysis. This came up a lot during the workshops. There were a lot of questions about safety, and this is a very important component of our analysis. So as part of the analysis, we did do an extensive safety analysis, but we're looking at this again to, based on feedback from the workshops, we want to determine if, make sure we identify any potential safety impacts, and we're comparing those safety impacts with the operational impacts and the SPIS locations as well. So the conversation today and at the workshops was really focused on those operational impacts, but we understand the importance of safety and making sure we present those safety results. So we can come back in the next couple of months as we finalize our kind of further look at the safety analysis and provide you with additional information. Next slide. And then now just for a quick overview, of the workshop discussion and results. First, I wanted to go over the timeline that was included in the memo. So for the rest of September and October, we'll be pulling together all the information that was shared as part of the workshops and refining the potential mitigation. We'll schedule the follow-up conversations with jurisdiction staff over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll begin to incorporate that into the draft EA. Federal Highways will then complete a review of the draft EA before it's released for public comment. Then that's not the end point of our ongoing conversations and coordination with you all and your staff. We will continue that coordination after the draft is released to refine mitigations and address public comments before a revised EA and the National Environmental Policy Act decision document, which we're anticipating in the spring of next year. So next slide. So we don't want to go through all of the results and everything that was presented in that memo kind of step by step, because like we said, we want to make sure we save time for your specific questions. And we're happy to take any specific questions on any of those intersections and mitigations included in the memo, but we really just wanted to provide a few highlights here as part of this initial presentation. So as previously mentioned, ODOT will cover the full cost of mitigation for all the intersections impacted in 2027. In 2045, ODOT would cover the full cost of mitigation for 7 of the 9 impacted intersections. And then there are the 2 that will require shared investment strategy because they're not fully a project impact. They are also impacted in the no build alternative. So those are Stafford Road and Childs Road, and 12th Street and Willamette Falls Drive. Again, because these are 2045 impacts, we're proposing monitoring, but we're also discussing with staff what the long-term mitigation solution would be. Next slide. We also identified in the memo 3 intersections that were added to the impacts list based on input from staff at the workshops. So Stafford and Mountain was previously identified as a 2045 impact, but it was right at the mobility standard for 2027. So based on workshop input and being right at that standard, we went ahead and pulled that into the 2027 impact list. And then Oregon 99E and West Arlington and Oregon 213 and Washington were not previously identified as impacted, but similarly to Stafford and Mountain, they were right at the mobility standard. So that's for 2045 for those 2 intersections. They were right at the mobility standard. So we've gone ahead and added those to the list as well to look at for long-term monitoring. So we'll have follow-up discussions with staff to identify what the right solutions for these intersections are, since they weren't part of the detailed discussions with staff at the workshops. We also, in addition to these, we did receive input about other intersections that were either not included in our analysis and or not identified for impacts. And we're taking all of that input and looking at those intersections again to provide more information as to why they might not have been included in our analysis, or, to confirm that was the accurate approach. So we're happy to continue to take that information and look at any intersections that anyone feels that we may have missed in our initial analysis. Next slide. So quickly, just to reiterate kind of the next steps here, we are working on refining those mitigations and having the ongoing conversations with jurisdiction staff. We are looking again at the safety analysis and the overlaps with the operational analysis to further identify if there are any safety impacts. We'll incorporate all of that refined information based on these conversations into the draft TA. We'll then continue those conversations over the next several months to get to what the final mitigation commitments are that would be included in the revised EA. So with that, that's really high-level overview of what we wanted to present today, and we are happy to take questions and go from there. Thank you.
Great. If you could restore the screen, perhaps that'd be great. I have a question, our statement, and then maybe a question afterwards. So earlier on in this process, I know I and others pointed out the concern we had of using the 2015 as the base year for the traffic analysis. And I raised that with the key point at the time being that diversion was occurring in 2015, right? And these impacts to these intersections and these roads were impacted by the diversion as a result of the bottleneck, not a responsibility per se of the local jurisdictions to fix the interstate. But I would argue that if you looked at 2010, for example, during the recession, you probably have a better idea of what the normal flow perhaps would be, because I do know that we saw a stark increase, a pretty significant increase in diversion. We got a break there for a while, and of course the economy grew and everything else. When it came back, but 2015, to use that as the base year and say, and granted, it might be 2 or more now intersections, maybe 5 intersections that are being relooked at for mitigation. I just think that that's not really quite fair. And that might perhaps be a bone of contention in the future or near future. So I just ask you to consider that, consider the fact that these intersections are already affected, again, by the diversion that existed in 2015 as a result of the bottleneck. So I see some hands up. Councilor Sherman.
Thank you. Good information. Appreciate the presentation, and a couple quick questions. First, and I apologize if this is something we've covered in the past. So the commitment being made related to, say, the 2027 mitigation, is that a commitment to address these situations in advance, or are we? What's the time frame of that, or does it have to be broken before it's fixed?
Della, do you want to
I think I can answer that. Yeah, I think I can answer that. As we identify and get to a place in the final NEPA project, we will have an intergovernmental agreement with every intersection that we're looking to improve, I believe. And at that time, we would be able to get into the details of specifying the construction dates. It is our intention to release those improvements for construction as soon as practicable from design. So, for instance, if it's a signal upgrade or those sorts of things, some of them may happen sooner than, say, a full-blown roundabout. But the project being, the construction of the improvements and the gantries would start in, I believe, 24. With the 3rd lane and 12th and River Bridge being completed by 26. And so our expectation is that by the time we're opening up the facilities, that we would be complete with mitigation or very close to that.
Thanks, Della. I appreciate
The
that.
mitigated intersections.
Gotcha. So is it predicated on kind of those buckets we saw of revenue coming in, where the revenue needs to be there for this to occur, or is it coming from some other bucket as these situations arise?
For this particular suite of intersections that are identified as being impacted by the tolling project, they would be paid for by ODOT, whether or not it's the project toll specifically paying for them or other revenue sources. ODOT would take the responsibility for funding for those improvements. Okay, and one last question. So it sounds like the measurement for kind of mitigation and diversion impact is kind of a pass-fail situation. If it fails the mobility standard or is right on the line, kind of gets pushed into the address bucket. If not, are there circumstances where, we had intersections that were actually performing pretty well and there's a significant negative impact, but it doesn't get to fail? Are there any situations where, and this wouldn't be for like us to decide, but local jurisdictions, are there some that kind of would be in an area where it'd be a significant impact, but doesn't get it to that failure status? Well, through the federal process, we, look at study intersections and look at their, operational functionality once the changes occurred. There's other aspects and lived experience in communities that don't always plug into our model of, our agreed upon methodology. So in those particular areas, and that's one of the items we want to make sure you are hearing today, there's lived experience in intersections that aren't identified or other intersections that weren't necessarily studied. We want to hear about those. We want to spend time with our team, doing deep dives with your local agency staff and really assessing so that when we do open up in 26 fully for all the, the entire facility, that we've got a transportation system that's working seamlessly. Okay, very good. Thanks. I appreciate the answers. You bet.
Next up is Councilor Pratt.
Hi, I have 2 different questions. My first one is on these projects that are 2045 year of impact, you have monitor long-term mitigation, I think, on all of them. So I just want a little more definition of what that means. If you go out in 10 years and you're seeing big issues, will you deal with it then, or are these going to wait till 2045?
I'll take a first stab, and then I want to certainly let our technical team jump in here. And thank you for the question. So as we're monitoring, if we see, and again, the traffic modeling, which is in alignment with federal processes for evaluating impacts to intersections, we have assumptions we put into the model, and again, in some cases, the model doesn't always match up with the lived experiences. It's a prediction. We agree on assumptions, and of course, based on the experiences we've all personally had over the last few years, not everything is predictable. And so we will monitor. That's the part of the purpose of monitoring. And should it exceed the operational thresholds, we would be looking to address those areas sooner. There could also be intersections that even in 2045 aren't having problems that we aren't needing to address as well. And maybe we're monitoring those longer until the time comes that resolution needs to be implemented. So with that, I want to go ahead and let our technical team, Nicole, jump in here with any revisions or clean up any of my comments.
That's accurate. If I mean, that's the purpose of the monitoring, is to determine the appropriate timing for that mitigation. So if we are monitoring it and seeing that the impact is occurring before 2045, even though the modeling indicated it was more of a 2045 impact, then that mitigation would be advanced to address that failure earlier.
Okay. And then my other question specifically on the intersection at Borland Road and 65th. I mean, considering the diversion that ODOT's own studies have shown are expected where the gantries are at, that I'm surprised it's on the 2045 list. I'm wondering if you included, like, we have construction that's begun in Tualatin, construction that's planned in the next couple of years. And we also, Wilsonville is the same situation where people are going to come up 65th. So I'm wondering if that was considered when this construction's already been started or is planned within the next year or two. And the other thing is, I'm wondering on 65th, just south, like a block or two, that intersection there, it's a narrow road with no multimodal. I mean, it's got a real narrow shoulder. So I'm wondering why that wasn't included as part of the mitigation project.
Thank you for the question and good comments. That is part of the purpose of our conversation here today. I know Adela is taking notes and we'll make note of your concerns and get more information related to questions around 65th. We also, as a project delivery and construction engineer myself, I have a lot of anxiety once we start construction about the impacts of the traveling public, usually. And so we are trying to get information in the urban mobility office and evaluate impacts from construction from not just ODOT, but our neighboring jurisdictions. And so the impacts of the construction that you all have planned in your schedules are something that we'd be interested in including with our project team and making sure that we're considering the best way to coordinate, as well as any possible adjustments we should be making now. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for considering that.
I appreciate Councilor Pratt's comments. And while we're talking about that area, I just want to point out another observation I've made in traveling through the area at rush hour, which is pretty bad, and afternoon rush hour in particular. And that is that I'm sensing that there are a lot of the traffic are diverting off of Interstate 5 on the Boone's Ferry, or what I think is Boone's Ferry, that comes on to ultimately Borland Road and 65th, and then funneling into Borland Road to the traffic circle. And I've been several times here, had the traffic circle back up at Borland and Stafford to the point where the queue getting on the I-205 is stacked up, so that the traffic circle is almost disabled and failing at that point. So are you all seeing relief as a result of the project? And that's not a failing intersection?
Do you want me to hop in there, Della? I think we'll have to look at that specifics and get back to you on that specific location. But I know in general, in some locations of traffic being because operations are improved with the project on I-205, there are places where there are impacts currently on getting onto the highway that go away with the project. So we are seeing some improvements on some of those on-ramps and places of people coming back to 205, and because of improved operations on 205, it's easier to get onto the highway. So I'm not sure if that is one of those locations where that is specifically what we're seeing. We'll have to look into that a little bit more and come back to you, but in some locations we are seeing that.
Yeah, just one other note on that. I just wanted to find it pretty striking that most of the folks are crossing the overpass over 205 to get on to continue on Stafford Road, and very few people at that point are trying to jump back on to 205. So clearly they're going around either Interstate 5 or all the above to get into communities around the Stafford Road area. The other one too that I think is important, and that is the safety concerns along these roads. There's no sidewalks or shoulders. Granted, Stafford, that's a county road in Borland, but you know, with all this dangerous traffic, I mean, it certainly adds to the safety concerns. And is there, you know, I'd like to know there'll be, you don't have to answer it now, but is there any safety mitigation that'll be done, because it's unsafe today, and it's certainly exacerbated by the current diversion that we're experiencing in the traffic. So you can answer that later. I want to get to Councilor Baumgartner. Councilor?
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. I wanted to just maybe echo what I've heard Councilor Pratt, I think, mention, and Councilor Sherman, is a commitment to listening to the experiences of the commuters and the residents, not just monitoring for what constitutes a failed intersection using engineering standards and benchmarks, because I think that's really important. And I'm hoping that we won't be getting responses like, yeah, we see that's failing, we're going to keep monitoring it. Or I'm just really looking for a very heartfelt commitment to working with us when these things start failing, which they're going to do.
Like, I think that's for me, Councilor Baumgartner, and I'm not sure if we've had a chance to meet, but it's nice to meet you today. And yeah, we are here to get it right. When we open up this facility, you know, most of us in our office are coming to work every day with the focus of making the quality of life better for Oregonians. And we can't do that without the partnership with leaders like yourself, as well as, you know, hearing and understanding the lived experience. So I'm there with you. Again, as an engineer, we have a methodology, we have a process that we've agreed to on how we are going to evaluate operational functionality of these intersections. We have that, you know, sort of baseline information based on what was agreed to, and now we need to proof it out and have additional conversations, not just in the future, but even in the coming months, about making sure that we're getting this right in our analysis. And the only way to know that for sure is to be able to work with you as leaders, as well as your technical staff, and hear the lived experiences of folks who are out using those intersections and what the challenges are. So I can say that, you know, certainly after opening day, as challenges arise, you know, we stand shoulder to shoulder with you in serving the public and being able to get around our transportation system. But more than that, I'll say even in the coming months, we want to do as much as we can to really proof out these recommendations.
Thank you. I would also like to add that I have heard others reinforce the concept that having all of the gantries go live at the same time in the whole region would be much more beneficial than this phased rollout, which will inevitably impact smaller areas much more damagingly. And I also wanted to say that I'm also hearing from people and experiencing myself a sense of not being heard. And I appreciate what you just said, and I hear your words, and I look forward to working with you too. But in the past, I have come to meetings like this and asked questions, and been told, for instance, notably the very first time representatives from ODOT came to a council meeting in West Lynn, I asked whether there would be assistance and funding from ODOT to help with mitigation of impacts to our surface streets and improvements, and I was told no. So I'm glad to hear that that's maybe not true anymore, but that was kind of a gut punch, I have to say, to be being told, yes, this is going to happen and there's going to be no help. So I'm glad to hear that that's maybe not going to happen, and more partnering will happen. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well
Thank you.
said. You want to respond, Ella?
I think, you know, as we continue, again, like I said, we want to get to a place where we've got a transportation system that, you know, works for the traveling public, whether they're on the state system or on our local streets. We all have, I think, portfolios that we manage. There is, you know, an amount of gas tax that goes to the local agencies and the cities and counties, as well as the state. And I will be clear, I don't want to be misleading here, that we want to stand shoulder to shoulder and understand the challenges, work together with staff to find the solutions. And then from there, we'll have to, you know, work through the normal processes of responsibility for maintaining local systems and state systems. However, we won't know exactly what that breakdown should be without having the opportunity to work with staff and see what the challenges are and what the solutions are before we get to the stages of figuring out the funding structures.
Okay. Mr. Cook.
Yeah, just two quick questions. One is probably more for Commissioner Savas and maybe Trent. Of as we go through this with the mitigation process, who at the county is representing the Stafford Hamlet? If we have questions to say, hey, what have you guys been talking about? We're not involved in that meeting. We kind of like to be at the table, but I know I understand we can't. But so who at the county can we actually contact with and say, can you take us through that steps? And then the second question you mentioned about the Stafford Rosemont roundabout, there's a change in that. And if you were going to touch on that today, that'd be great. And at any time, Della, you want to come and park at my house, I live right by the Rosemont Stafford roundabout. I might even have a bottle of grape juice for you.
Rick, I think at these tables for the unincorporated areas, it's my role to represent folks in meetings like this that are in the Stafford area and other tables. So that's our job. And I am accompanied with our staff who help and listen. And so at the technical tables, our staff are doing that. So maybe I can reach out to one of our staff to at least establish who your contact person is at staff level, and make sure you got that conduit. Okay.
And then just
I would just add to that county staff attended all of these local meetings, and so not just for the ones around Stafford Hamlet, but including the ones around Canby and Oregon City, which represents those areas around those cities as well, so those unincorporated areas. So county staff is attending those, and some of them are actually in the audience of this meeting. So we can get you those names, and I can find a more designated point of contact for that for anyone who's interested.
I think that would be the great point, because we've got, I know a couple of people from our CPO are listening on, the board members, that we say like, okay, so who do we go to the county? We keep throwing darts, but if we had one contact person that we could work with, that would eliminate us, you know, calling Commissioner Savas and just, you know, harassing him. So if we just had that one person, that would be great. And then once again, the Stafford Rosemont change. I don't know if you're going to talk about that today, or if that's just something we could bring up later on.
Right. I might just ask Mayor Walters if I know that there's parts of that area that are closer to West Lynn, they're close to Tualatin, they're close to Lake Oswego. I'm sure that they share some of those concerns, and I would assume that they would also be echoing maybe, or sharing or listing and factoring all those things that are happening on the edge of their cities as well. So I see a head nod, so that's good. So Councilor Sacco.
Thank you. I really appreciate this list. I think we know we've seen maps in the past. I think that this list that was provided is very helpful to provide a detailed list of information. One thing that I feel that would be really helpful is seeing the larger picture if in this document, and maybe it exists somewhere else, but you had talked about, Della, you had talked about other projects that have been brought up that are being looked at, or projects that have already been looked at that maybe don't meet that criteria. I think it would be helpful to see that complete list. So as we're talking about, like Commissioner Savas brought up Boone's Ferry Road, at what point was that looked at? What was the potential mitigation and notes like in that column, and having a list of all of those areas. So as we're looking through this list, and as you mentioned, Della, those lived experiences, if there's anything that was already considered or brought up, we would be able to have more input on the things that this document doesn't give us insight to those areas, or your notes that you have already for potential mitigation.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to make sure I understand it. So what I'm hearing is we've given you a memo that describes, I think, 23 intersections and outcomes, and there were 50 that were studied as part of the work, and you're interested in the notes on the, I guess now I have to do math in my head, 27 or 27 other intersections that weren't identified here for mitigation in 27 or 2045. And I'll defer to Nicole on that, but I would think that our team would be able to work with your staff and or you to talk through ones of interest as you see that list. And I believe we can make that available, or we have in the past, but I'll defer to Nicole to make sure I'm accurate.
Yes, we can provide information as to the 50 intersections that were studied, and then the ones why they weren't identified for an as impacted and therefore identified for mitigation. We can also provide information on how we got to that 50 study intersections as well, and the considerations and criteria that led to the identification of those. So yeah, happy to have those conversations.
Thank you.
Councilor Morrow.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas, and thank you to ODOT for the presentation and the information here. First, I just want to say that I appreciated looking at the timeline to see that there is a space carved out for staff follow-up, because I think something that you're hearing from a lot of cities and a lot of city staff is that we feel like we'll say something and then it's like, okay, duly noted, and then feeling as though that hasn't actually been taken into account once further presentations have been given. And so I'm glad to see that there will be more follow-up with the jurisdictions to see how we can further refine this list. And on that note, I just want to bring attention to the arch bridge. That's something that I did not see, but I would like to see addressed, because you're hearing this all the time. The diversion on our streets is already unacceptable. And, we're coming up to our 100th anniversary of the arch bridge and looking forward to having that celebration with our neighbors in West Lynn. But I was just thinking how unfortunate it would be that heading into this next centennial of our beloved arch bridge, that it would someday become an arch parking lot, essentially, with the diversion that we're going to be seeing there. So first of all, I'd just like to see what you guys are modeling for that area, especially as it pertains to the intersection with our Main Street, which is our primary economic corridor in Oregon City.
Yeah, and appreciate the question. I'm going to defer to Nicole and where that particular facility was studied. And in any case, again, today is about hearing notes on overarching, sorry, no pun intended, of global concerns or specific details that folks feel like we've missed. This is the time for us to start taking inventory of those lists. So I'll check in with Nicole and see if she has additional remarks.
Yeah, the arch bridge was part of the consideration and the approaches to that. So we can provide more detail on the specifics of the operations at those intersections and how that that bridge was part of our analysis. So happy to follow up with more of those conversations.
That would be great. Thank you. And then the other thing, or another thing that I have is looking at these proposed on this grid that you've provided on the memo, looking at the mitigation strategies. I'm seeing a lot of things. I mean, most of them are related to safety improvements, which is all something that we're very concerned about as it relates. I see a lot of like signalizing improvements and stuff like that. But with the increased congestion on here, I'm not seeing any sort of commitments on capacity here at these intersections, which is understandable because a lot of these spaces, at least in Oregon City, there is not room for increased capacity. But I am just a little concerned seeing that the only mitigation, at least from what I'm seeing, is only related to the safety aspect, when in fact we also need to address the capacity issue.
Yeah, I'll jump in there and appreciate that question. So again, the opportunity to work with your staff at these intersections and continue the conversation about what the proper mitigation approach should be is the work that's ongoing over the next few weeks here as we move into submitting a draft environmental assessment document. And in that work, not only looking at items that we have missed maybe to capacity, but also the team having some time to apply a safety lens to the typical federal process of just operational assessment. So both of those items coming together and with your staff to be able to identify what would be a proper solution to mitigate those challenges, we look forward to continuing to have those conversations in the detailed areas where you have concerns.
Thank you. And then lastly, I just want to reiterate the possibility that you guys could look into moving the gantries outside of Oregon City and West Linn city limits, because I'm hearing this from my staff every single time. Please say that, because this is something that would be such a big step in reducing the diversion altogether. So I just wanted to end on that note and reiterate that again, because I think that's something shared by our friends across the river as well, that even though we don't want it to be just this stretch of 205 in the first phase, if that's going to be the case, can we please look at moving those gantries in a way that it will mitigate diversion in the first place? Thank you.
So
Appreciate the comment, and we will make note of that.
did you mean to move the gantries to another state?
Maybe that would be nice.
All right. Mayor Walters.
Yeah, we actually asked that question about moving the gantries. We had a presentation from ODOT on Monday in our city council meeting, and Councilor Baumgartner asked that question, and the answer was no, that they can't be moved. Those two gantries are fixed right now and they will not be moved. But it's probably, as Commissioner Morrill just said, one of the biggest flaws of this project, because people will get off at Stafford because the gantry is after the Stafford exit. And that's what's causing all the problems. So my question is more about, I do have concerns, the slimming down of this list. I think when we started with 50, I could probably name 50 spots in West Linn alone, let alone when we're talking about the entire corridor and the city surrounding. And also the cascading effect. So we know that we have diversion on Willamette Falls Drive, but then we have diversion from Willamette Falls Drive. So diversion from the diversion, people trying to avoid the backup. So we have people going through the neighborhoods. And I want to ask you specifically, what have you looked at that in your models? And is there a plan for repairing those neighborhood roads and making them safer and reducing some of that cascading effect of the diversion? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Walters, for the question, and I'll need some help from the technical team on the details around this. But these again are the feedback is part of the lived experience piece of the work before we get to the final answers here. And so again, in this particular area with as you see some of the other 27 intersections that aren't identified on this memo through the agreed upon traffic modeling operational analysis, we are interested in meeting with you and your technical staff to talk through some of the concerns that you have with those intersections or others. And again, I think the question around the cascading effects is a good one. I think it's we'll be pushing up against our modeling abilities as far as I know. Luckily, I'm not a modeler. So I'll let the teams dig into that question, but it'll certainly be on the list of things for us to talk about with you and your staff as we dig into the concerns in your particular community. So Nicole, anything to add there?
Well, I'm not a modeler either. So, probably do need to, follow up with the technical, the transportation technical team to give a more thorough response. But we do look at the entire system within the model and do look at how, impacts in one intersection can affect other intersections, especially along the study corridors that we are looking at. And then also, how the mitigations we are proposing, making sure those don't cause other impacts in other locations too. So I think that just as a basic answer, but we can get back to you certainly with more details about some of the specifics of that kind of cascading effects that you're talking about.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Great. Councilor Sherman.
Sorry, I'll make this one quick, and my office phone just started ringing, so I apologize if it's ringing in the background. So question just, and I don't know if this applies or not, but the definition of diversion for like the regional congestion pricing planning kind of, based on the ODOT document is still kind of being debated and kind of deciding like how far away from an arterial is diversion and whether it's local traffic versus, through traffic. Does that impact this discussion at all in the future? Does this project become kind of part of the regional congestion pricing matrix over time? Or are the things we're discussing now, does that kind of get set in stone for this project as a standalone, and the other things are kind of at the broader regional level?
Yeah, I think, since we are in the federal environmental process for the I-205 tolling project, we are in a place of discussing the specific project related impacts. The policy decisions, at other levels, again, create that umbrella, but in any case, as far as I understand, do not preclude those project specific sort of conversations that would occur. So we do continue to do work that we've, related, that's in alignment with the federal process. That is what we're engaging in right now. And again, those higher level policies typically do not reach down to a level so much as to influence the project specific sort of solutions that are required for any project that's going to go through a NEPA process such as this. And I'll make sure Nicole's got a chance to jump in here.
Yeah, I would say that's my understanding as well. Those are larger policy umbrellas, and the specifics of diversion and impacts related to this project are tied to the NEPA process and our analysis and methodology related to that.
Sure. I mean, I guess the reason I asked the question is let's say, theoretically, and we would all agree, modeling is modeling. So you do the best you can right now, and then it's iterative over time. You're kind of looking at how are things progressing. And so as they progress, that's going to be under a future umbrella potentially. And so what I'm kind of just wondering is, I kind of just trying to understand how those things fit together. So 15 years from now, we're saying, wow, there are a lot of intersections that were impacted by this that we weren't able to model initially, but now because of the way it's been defined, they're actually not being covered anymore. I mean, I guess that's all debatable in the long term. It's not really a policy issue at this juncture.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there are policies that are implemented that, encourage us to go and look at certain impacts differently, that we're seeing challenges to the traveling public, and there's a policy that helps guide that work. I can't predict the future, but I don't know that we don't want to get to the right answers and right solutions for our transportation system with the best information we have at the time. So, and I'm not sure, are you referring, Councilor Sherman, to the metro policies or the ODOT highway plan amendments? Is
Right,
that-
right. So we've got the metro
Okay,
policies,
okay.
which are kind of a lot more in alignment with what our kind of thoughts are, and then the Oregon Highway Plan, which at this point aren't in alignment, and so. And I apologize if there have been negotiations at the ODOT side that I'm not aware of at this point, but last I had seen the documentation, we were still looking at like, diversion only occurs within 1 mile of an arterial in a parallel path, and it's only considered to be through traffic, not local traffic with a 3 mile or less distance traveled. And now what I'm kind of saying is, okay, so does this project over a future point in time become considered part of that regional pricing program, because it is, and do those guidelines impact the ability to address diversion in the future if they fall into those broader guidelines? And I know you
thank
can't
for the
publicly answer it right
clarification.
now.
So I can, I think I can lean into this one now that I understand which policy you're referencing. So the Urban Mobility Office works closely with the Policy Data and Analysis Division run by Amanda Peets. And with the toll amendments, we and I believe I've seen Eric Havig come and present a few times. I don't know if you've heard his presentation, but the high level policy is meant to be an umbrella sort of statewide perspective on toll policy. And then of course the NEPA process that goes into project by project basis does not necessarily, it can go in this particular case, I'm stumbling now, but I'm trying to remember exactly how he put it. But the project by project analysis is separate and distinct from the policy work, and the project by project analysis is beholden to the NEPA requirements for that work. So there is a granularity to the work that we do once we get into a project that the umbrella statewide policy doesn't dive into.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I apologize. Were we going to take a second to just talk about proportional share and how that's calculated? Is proportional share based on like the amount of traffic that could be dictated, came from the locality versus from a project, or how will that work? Is that something you can talk about in like 30 seconds? Or
I certainly can't. I don't have that information. And again, if you look at the initial results, we've got, it looks like, maybe 10 or 20 years to talk about how we would want to approach a proportional share. I think a lot of it rides on what the solution is with local staff. And then from there, you start to dig through, as I mentioned before. I think we all as I guess all of us traffic folks, regardless of the agencies we work for, we want to have a system that works for the public. And so as we see challenges in the other regions I've worked with in ODOT, we work with the local agencies to understand what the issues are and provide the opportunity to collaborate on solutions. And then once we get to the solutions, then we're able to determine what the appropriate funding mechanism is. But without identifying the solutions, it's difficult to make those determinations.
Okay, thank you.
And in these two cases, we have a lot of unknowns between now and 2045.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Counselor, about that. I know it was on our agenda, and my earlier concern about using 2015 as the base year, frankly, I think changes the math if you look at a different year like 2010, for example. I have an overall comment before we close out here. I know we just have a few minutes and some of us have a hard stop at 1, I do. And that is that, early on, we were led to believe that, transit would be funded. We were led to believe that there would be revenue sharing for the local jurisdictions. And now I'm really wondering if that's actually ever going to happen, especially on the local revenue sharing. If there's not, then our concerns about safety on some of our local facilities are elevated, in my opinion, and striking that there is no plan to address that out of the gate. And so it seems like revenue is way up here as a goal, and safety is just not even on the table right now. And it seems to me again, that we have, in West Lynn, Oregon City, and others as well, other roads that are feed into this whole system are being impacted by diversion, whether it's because the I-5 backup or it's the I-205 backup. So frankly, I just worry about the word, and it gives me a lot of pause, frankly, the word, we're going to monitor it. It reminds me back in the days when I asked Metro about the housing crisis that I saw coming 12 years ago. And they said, we're monitoring it. And then 8 years ago, we're monitoring it. And here it is. And nothing really ever really happened of significance to mitigate that. So I just like to have more definition about what monitoring is. If the problem happens on day one and not 2027, for example, and it's failure of a certain facility, do we have to monitor it for how long? And then when are those investments going to be made? I'd like to see some more definition to understand what's going to unfold if there is an immediate problem. And of course, you can't answer that today.
Appreciate the comments. I know we're taking notes on these items, and again, we are looking at moving through a safety lens on the existing operational work that's been done on the intersections. And again, as far as, being able to ensure that we've got a functional transportation system, as we move through the opportunity to address our greenhouse gas goals and create reliable travel time for our state. I think, these are the sorts of questions we want to dive into and understand better. And I feel like over the next months and years, we'll be able to work together with you and your staff in order to make sure that we are getting this right. So I appreciate the comments.
You bet. Okay, well, we have about less than a minute left. Anything for the good of the order, Trent? Okay. Well, thank you, ODOT, for your presentation today and answering our questions. And I'm sure we'll have much more the next time. So anyone else?
Thank you for having us.
Bet.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.